Hello, and welcome to What We've Learnt, Series 2, Episode 2. As ever, myself, Steve Kemish, joined by Shane Redding. Hello, Shane.
Hi.
How are we doing?
Okay.
Good. Another guest loaded into the guest tank. Who have we got this time?
Oh, so excited about our guest on this episode. Lawrence Mitchell, known a very long time, has had a huge variety of roles in his career, from being a publishing product person through to a chief customer officer, was CMO at RBI, and now entrepreneur, non-exec, and executive coach. We are in for a real treat.
Yeah, absolutely. And very pertinent timing, Shane, I think. As you're about to find out, listeners, Lawrence's session runs really neatly from Ian Hughes, who we had the pleasure of talking with last episode. And also the timing's great for many of you that may be considering, whether it's by own choice or by forced situation, how you may change your career, what that may look like. And Lawrence's journey, as you're about to hear, is a really fascinating and engaging and uplifting story for us all.
So on this episode of What We've Learned, I'm so excited to be talking to Lawrence Mitchell today. Not just because Lawrence is joining us from Australia and he stayed up a little bit late to be able to do this episode, but because genuinely Lawrence is one of the people through my career I have always learned a lot from. And if I had a difficult question that I needed an answer to, he was probably my first port of call. So welcome, Lawrence. I'm not quite sure how to introduce you because you are a true portfolio worker. So is it fair to say your correct title for today would be founder of Raw Energy and Equilibrium? But I think there's more to it than that. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's it, really. I've really consolidated what I do. So I'm the founder and CEO of Raw Energy and Equilibrium. So that's one hat I wear. And then I'm also the VP for APAC for the Wellbeing at Work Summits. So they're the two areas. And they both push in the same direction in the sense that they're very focused on promoting and enabling well-being in individuals, in teams, and in businesses.
So your story of how you've ended up in the sort of well-being world, and I know it's something you're very passionate about and is very relevant to many of us today. But you started in publishing. How did you get from publishing, Lawrence, to where you are today in Australia?
Now, it's an interesting question, and I think the truth is, publishing. I started in publishing, and what I realise now is that the publishing world was changing literally as soon as I started. So I kind of got to experience digital disruption, if you like, even though I didn't have that term right at the start of my career. And when you work in such a very changing, unsettling, uncertain environment, you start to create skills and a mindset. And I realized quite early that I had to look after myself, because if I didn't, there was no way I could cope with the level of stress and the level of uncertainty. And that pretty much framed my entire career. So I started in publishing just as Amazon was coming in the market. And then one of the benefits of publishing is that you have so many products, you get a lot of responsibility very early. So by the time I was 24, I had a team of about 8 people and a lot of responsibility. And then it just developed from there. The industry changed. I very much wanted to be in marketing because I studied psychology as an undergraduate, and that was very much about people and helped me understand people in a much deeper way. And marketing at the very core is about understanding customers, understanding people, and being able to connect with people at a deep level. So that's really how the whole thing evolved and changed. And then opportunities came along and doors opened, and my career progressed in terms of marketing leadership. But this well-being theme has run all the way through, and it started from literally that self-preservation. I've got to look after myself, otherwise I'm not going to have the energy, I'm not going to have the vitality, I'm not going to be able to cope. And then that's developed into more of a professional interest, and now it's my whole business, my whole life. It started as a project of passion. So developing a blog. So I started writing just as I was learning, and then it's evolved and turned into programs and products and services and what I do now.
Fascinating start, Lawrence, and almost a kind of awakening, it sounds like. Well-being and mindfulness has become so much more fashionable. Sounds the wrong word, but we're much more aware of it. But you obviously have gone on that personal journey that's taken you to today. With what you do in that area, who are the organisations or the clients you work with? What is a kind of typical project or client week look like for you with this hat on?
So I work with individuals, mainly leadership people. I think about the types of people I work with on a one-to-one level are people who are in a position of leadership or a position of influence. They may not necessarily be managing people, but they've certainly got curious minds. They're keen to make a difference, and so I'll work with a lot of people around the world in that role. Then I work with teams, so creating programs to really enhance culture, providing a lot of content, a lot of training programs, a lot of initiatives to really help people help themselves and create a more positive culture based on resilience. There's a lot of interest in that area now. There always has been, but it's really stepped up in the last 6 months, as you'd expect. And then I also work as a consultant around business well-being, so helping clients create marketing strategies and customer experience strategies within their business. So typically I'll work with medium-sized businesses, but also larger businesses. It really depends on what sector the organization is. So I tend to work with businesses who are in the health, wellness, and adjacent sectors, who are looking to really be able to impact and create a positive change in the broader customer environment.
Really interesting. You've managed to sort of marry your, as you say, your personal interest in resilience and well-being and learning with, I love the term business well-being. We don't actually use that very often. Is that something, because you had the role of Chief Marketing Officer at RBI, massive enterprise, is that something you started to think about when you were there, Lawrence, at an enterprise level, business well-being?
Oh, very much so. It's very interesting because it's really all come together this year. Because this year is the first time in February I started working 100% for myself. So all the different pieces. So I talk about individual well-being, team well-being, business well-being, and all of those things impact each other, because ultimately, if we as individuals are not feeling good in our bodies, in our minds, then that's going to impact the people we associate with, whether it's our team, our family. And if the team are not feeling in a good vibe, that's going to impact the business well-being. So it's kind of logical, but piecing those areas together very much started when I was CMO, and I became CMO of RBI in 2008, literally 1 month before the world changed at that point in terms of the global financial crisis. So I had to learn and look at the organization, and it took me. I took on that role in 2008, and I did that role actually for 9 years. And during that period, and I feel very fortunate to have done that level of role at a time when the company transformed so much. So in 2008, it was a magazine business. You remember, Shane, it was a traditional trade publisher. But when I left in 2016, it had transformed into a data software analytics business. So very different. Half the business was sold in that period, and that put huge amounts of pressure and stress on the people. So it was leading a team, and at one point I had a team of 200 people based around the world. So there was a massive management responsibility, and I would think about these issues a lot. How can we get a win-win-win, if you like? How can we get a win for the employees, a win for the customers, a win for the shareholders, a win for the business? Because it felt very uneven at points, and it was that drive to get that win-win-win result that resulted in me training to be a health coach. So I trained to be a health coach in 2013. And then I brought that knowledge into RBI and created a wellbeing program, initially as a side project to my day job, which was CMO. But that really took off. So that was that was 2014, so 6 years ago, and it just really took off and became this massive thing. And I was learning what I was doing, but there was a massive need for individuals to feel supported by the organization, and there was lots of questions about what can an organization do to support its people's well-being. And that area has grown hugely since that time, because mental health has become a really big area of focus, and it has been a focus for the last 5-6 years. But the last 6 months, again, it's become a very big issue, and many companies are now very interested in this area that previously were less interested. But it was during the RBI years that I was honing my skills, learning, trying to get these win-win-win results, to do my job as a marketer, reach out to customers, build a customer pipeline, whilst also looking after the interests of the employees to make sure that they felt supported, they had the skills, they had the knowledge, they felt good in their jobs. So I did a lot of there was a lot of focus on people development, culture, changing culture, embracing more of a global community. I called the marketing team the global marketing community, because it was very clear to me at the time that community is such a big part of well-being. And I think we've all learned that in recent times, because if you feel part of something, then that's a huge driver. I think we often think of well-being as some of the more physical things like food and movement and sleep, which all have an impact, but the broader picture is around connection, financial well-being, productivity, time, how we use our time. These are the areas that I focus on in my work, around those 5 pillars of well-being, which I have as part of my model.
Fascinating stuff, Lawrence. And it sounds, I'm just listening in, wondering whether it's at a corporate level or at an individual level. I was going to ask about the triggers that might mean that somebody either seeks out your support, or whether it's just now an open door. Every organization gets this. I fear probably it's not every organization gets this, but are there certain telltale signs, either crisis or more positive ones, as to why an organization or an individual starts to look at this area and think about how they can change or adapt or better understand this aspect of working life?
Yes, I think, often a burning platform does trigger the necessity to change. That was certainly RBI's experience, because there was a very, a heavily burning platform in 2008, and that created a huge amount of change in every part of the business, including culture. I think there was a deep understanding at RBI of the importance of people. I think one of the challenges that many leadership teams may have is that they don't necessarily embrace some of the softer elements of people management, that kind of emotional intelligence and really connecting into people, and it feels a little bit soft, a little bit fuzzy, a little bit difficult to deal with. And that's why it might be easier to focus on some of the technologies, some of the tools. And I'm not saying I'm brilliant at this, but as a new manager when I was 24, I told you, and I found it so hard managing a team of 7-8 people, because it was so unpredictable and emotional. So I really had to learn fast about how do I lead at that kind of early stage, and then gradually I built on that and recognized that even though managing and leading people brings with its challenges, if you can really connect and understand a person at an individual level, what their passions are, and you can align their passions with their work, that's when magic happens. So that drove me to really understand that. And now when I look at other organizations, often they know this is important. So previously, I would say pre-COVID, companies didn't necessarily see it as, they saw it as a nice to have. So if you talked about well-being, certainly when I started, and part of the role I did was bring well-being at RBI into the core of the business as a strategic priority. for many years, people saw well-being as a nice to have, i.e. if we bought a bowl of fruit and sent people to a Pilates class, then, we can tick that box. And compliance is certainly a factor here. But the companies who really do prioritize it and put resources into this area, and resources being like education, so educating their teams how they can support themselves, because there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of confusion in this area. But companies who really start to do those things, the value they get is tremendous in terms of retention, in terms of engagement, in terms of lower recruitment costs. And that's certainly what I found when I was running the wellbeing program at RBI. We won the best corporate wellbeing program at the end of 2016, and that was literally because even though we started with a desire to create a well-being program, what really happened was we created a program which really promoted the internal brand, because the feedback that we got was that it was really nice that the company actually cared about them. And that's what I feel people really want now. There's been so much change and people are working remotely. There's a lot of uncertainty over job security, over the future of different businesses. So in that context, that requires a different style of leadership to really be able to support people during that uncertainty, and also give them some sense of certainty, because that's what I learned leading at that level for 9 years, when there was one restructure after another. We were selling half the company, and everyone would ask me what's going to happen next. And the truth was I had no idea. But what I learned was that to help people keep focused and keep motivated, I had to create a vision of the future that was acceptable to them so they could focus. Because in truth, none of us know what the future holds, but what we do know is what we believe might hold. So I created a vision. I said, this is what's likely to happen. It might not, but it just gave people some sense of solid foundation, which enabled them to focus and do their work, which actually created certainty, because the business started to evolve and change and created a lot more customer value that has created the future that we're now part of.
I think that's really powerful, Lawrence, because I think it's really interesting what you learn about yourself as you go through these, as you say, uncertain times, is that for some of us, and I'll put myself firmly in that bucket, I like to plan. I like to look ahead. I like to think about the what ifs. And I think what you've really clearly articulated there for me is the role of the leader, or be it your CMO, but somebody to take the role about providing what certainty you can, being so important in an organisation. And I had a really interesting example. It was a very small one yesterday on a Zoom call, but was just checking in. And in fact, as a group, you used to contribute a lot to the B2B Council of the DMA, IDM, as was. And there was a question there going round, and people were trying to find out, and they were saying, who here has paid for extra screens for their staff, or a chair at home, or because actually, maybe their office environment isn't great? And I was thinking, this is a really functional conversation, and it was mainly around cost. And then, I won't say who, but one of the organisations said, well, actually, this is very timely because one of our employees is actually suing us for not providing the right equipment to work from home. And they were so far away from talking about what you've just talked about in terms of that empathy and the soft skills of putting it first. What can we do for you? It was almost, what do we have to do? I think it's really interesting, and that need for employee marketing, and you talked earlier about community as well.
Yes.
Challenging thing to do, though.
It is challenging, and that's why, as a marketer, the way I dealt with the internal, so I would think of the employees as a key customer segment, because I worked at RBI, and we've spoken a lot of time spent a lot of time talking about the experience at RBI. moving to Australia in at the end of 2016, I worked. I was chief customer officer for a company called SumoSalad, which is a household brand, and it was B2C. But thinking about all of the employees were customers as well. But if you think about them as key customers, there's a different energy. You treat people very differently than if you think of your employees as, they're lucky to have a job, and you treat them in a very different way. And so it comes back to this word that I use a lot, equilibrium. It comes back to balance, a balance between being really supportive of the employees, helping them feel supported in a good environment, and that ties into making sure you've got clarity on the values of your organization as a culture, so that you can recruit people who share those values. Because in my experience, whenever I've had challenging relationships, there's always been a disconnect in the values. And that's what conflict often results from, just a different set of values. We look at the world in different ways. But I think if you really think of your employees as a customer segment, as marketers, we all think about segmentation. It's the foundation of what we do, and employees are influencers. That's what they can do. If you think about your employees who are at a dinner party or wherever, on a Zoom call these days, and ultimately you want them to say they're proud of working for your brand, because that's what people will hear from it. And it's something I always strive for, so that if people who work for you, and they're the most engaged people, they understand your brand, they understand your organization culture. If they're advocates, then that's going to really have a ripple effect in the marketplace.
Lawrence, it's really interesting about just that point around the influence of value of an employee, because influence is a very off-used word at the moment as a currency. But of course, it's not just what they say, it's what they do, I suppose, as well. If an employee is happy and engaged, the quality of their output, the way they might handle a customer on a visit or on a call or whatever it might, visits probably not so much, but a virtual call, etc. Even those small interactions can be hugely affected. I wonder also, just back from the art of communication, right? We're in marketing, where we need to understand to write and say things in the language they'll understand. Of course, as you say, you've got to have that vision for your staff, but you've got to also put it in words and language and sentiment that they will relate to, rather than, and I've had this from years of client-side experience, of somebody senior comes down, presents a deck at everybody, and everyone leaves politely and has no idea what they've said. You've got to understand and have that empathy for them as well, I guess.
Very, very much so. And when I created the Wellbeing program back in 2016, 2014. Sorry, I lose track of time. That was a key part of it. It was really a marketing campaign to make it feel very different to what you would perceive a corporate wellbeing program would look like. And it was all about the content. It was all about the communication. It was all about segmentation. So everything that we do to make it appropriate and applicable to individuals rather than everybody. So I think that's really important. The other thing I would say, because there is so much change going on and so much uncertainty, often the leaders in businesses are often, everybody's problem is their problem. So it becomes even more critical that the leaders focus on their own personal well-being. That's why I do what I do, and feel resilient, because then they can show up in a big way. Because the leader is like a CMO, is a beam of light on an organization. If they're in a good frame of mind, if they're feeling good, if their mindset is right, then they'll be there. Those little issues will just bounce off them rather than really getting you down. And I've had that experience where you just feel like everything's getting on top of you, and then people ask you something and you bite their head off, and you create this negative vibe, this negative energy, and that's not acceptable. So we have to, as leaders, really prioritize our own personal well-being, our mental health, our physical well-being. It's all interconnected, so that we can show up and really support people and create, a positive team culture, which will have that knock-on effect on the business performance. So that's why I've always prioritized that part of my life, so that I can be there and, be there 100%.
But it's born out of, Lawrence, I guess, that what you've got in spades is both passion and experience on this topic, which makes you very credible and credible enough to launch, as you said, the business this year. So I'm going to ask you two questions in one, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask you about how it's been to launch that business in 2020 and what have the challenges been, what, not just for you and the business, but the wider environment on this topic, and then also how that focuses you for the outlook of the year ahead.
Yes.
If you rewind to your business planning, and what you thought the business might be, and how the world is now and how it will be. I wonder what you've learned that's as of value to you and the wider world.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And what Shane said before, I really relate to. So I've always been a planner, I've always had my, 5-year plan, 10-year plan. You really try and control and manage as much as you can. And in December, I did a great plan. I was in Bali and wrote this wonderful plan for 2020. None of it happened. Like everything changed. So I've learned this year to become a lot more, I guess, in the moment. And that might sound a bit cliche, but to still have a plan, but have a plan which you can flex. So I started my business in February 2020. In truth, it wasn't a complete startup because this has been a project of passion for me for 12 years. It started as a blog and then it grew and I trained as a coach. So it's always been a sideline project for me, a business that's been evolving, but it's only this year that it's been my main source of income. So February, I had to apply all the tools that I've learned. So I kind of left Sumo in February. I'd been working part-time there. And I started really building the business plan. And then of course, COVID happened and it was like, wow, all of my plans were based on in-person experiences primarily. I was running a big conference. And so we had all these things that everything had to change. And we just had to pivot the business and really focus, understand what's happening, really go back to the core principles of what are the customer problems, like who are the customers, what are the problems that they're experiencing, how can we help? And then what are the mechanisms to help? And so in February, in probably April, it felt very fluid. I knew I had the tools. I knew I could help, but everything was very fluid. So I thought, well, what can I do? And I thought I can create, I've got a background in publishing. I can create a magazine. That turned into this massive project. And I created, it's called Equilibrium. So it's a magazine and we launched that in an organic way in April. And that gave real focus. And then it's evolved from there because the brand Equilibrium really resonated with people. Everyone's looking for balance. Everyone's looking for resilience and to develop those skills. And then it evolved into, well, what can we do next? So the magazine is free. So everyone can download it for free. We've done 3 issues now around different aspects of well-being. And then it was, well, what can we do to build on it? So we evolved it into a program called Finding Equilibrium. And I worked with other people. So one of the areas, and I think I learned this at RBI because it's such a matrix-driven organization, that I've collaborated. So all the projects I've done this year, which include 3 virtual events, like big conferences, a wellness festival, magazines, this online training program now. It's all happened because of finding great partners to collaborate with who are aligned on values and have complementary skills to me. So in many ways, it feels like I'm working for a bigger company because I've got a team, but we're working in a very different way, more in a we've all got our own businesses, but we collaborate, we share resources, we share knowledge, we share expertise, and we co-create. And it's been incredibly fulfilling to have that, because one thing I've always worried about, having grown up in big companies and working with lots of people, I'd always worried about just working at home and being isolated, because that was never what I wanted. I like people and I like connecting with people, and it's very much been that kind of environment over the last 6 months, collaborating with people all around the world. Because one of the huge benefits, there's a lot of negatives, but one of the huge benefits from the pandemic is that the geographical constraints have gone away. So since I came to Australia, one of the big things I focused on was maintaining my relationships. My family live in the UK. So last year I went back twice. The year before I went back twice. This year I'm not going back at all. But everyone now is more comfortable having Zoom calls or having video calls, whereas pre-pandemic, it was the exception. You know, if you could meet in person, then people wanted to meet in person. Whereas now the world has learned that you can do a lot of work and co-create and do amazing things without ever actually meeting. So a lot of the people that I've been working with this year, I've never actually met in person, but we've done all this work together. So, which is amazing. So I feel this year for me has been a big lesson in terms of bringing it together, because I always say innovation loves constraints, and this year it has just taught me that more so, because we were doing this big conference in Singapore, which was meant to happen in April, but a lot of, it's a Wellbeing at Work conference, put a lot of energy and effort into it. We wasn't sure if it was going to happen. And then we had to cancel it, obviously, in March. And then it was just, okay, we can't do this. We can spend all our time, lamenting, if you like, and saying what a shame, or we can just focus on what can we do given the context. And that's pretty much what we do, and that's how I've always operated. It's like, that door is closed, which door is open? Let's just focus on that. Let's focus on what we can do. Let's focus on what we can control, and try and create a future destiny that is as by design as we can be. Because that's my belief, is that no matter how grim things may be, there's always a balance. There's always a point of equilibrium, and there's always going to be a bright spot, even if you can't see it at the time. That's what I've learned through my entire career of working in these environments, which was so fluid and so transformational. And sometimes you just felt like it was all kind of falling apart. But there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's always an important message to say to ourselves when we do feel in that dark place. And the light will always come. And we just need to find the direction. We need to talk to people who may know, who can help, because ultimately we can control a lot of things in our life, even though there are many things that we can't control. But we can control what we put in our body. We can control what we feed our mind. We can control whether we move our body and who we connect with and who we collaborate with.
I think, knowing you, Lawrence, that sort of advice, or the way you live your life of, you know, that positivity really shines through as the passion of what can we do, what can we control. And I know there'll be some people who are listening saying, oh, well, that Lawrence makes it sound easy, but I know it hasn't always been easy for you, and I know that there's been some frustrations along the way. In fact, I even remember when you were in the enterprise world, and I think you reached out to me and sort of saying, I'm doing this side hack, but, you know, how do you set up a business from scratch? And so just what have been some of the perhaps frustrations or learnings as you've been through this that have enabled you to focus on what you can do, to seize the opportunities? Great time to launch a magazine, by the way. Brilliant timing. You know, there couldn't be better. So, yeah, frustrations. When it hasn't worked, be honest about those, Lawrence.
Oh my God, there's been so many frustrations, like so many times it hasn't worked, and I felt overstretched, and it's felt like a big black hole, and it's never gonna happen. I think ultimately you realize I right now, and I wouldn't have said this in the past, but right now I take everything one day at a time. And I look at that as a unit of time. And I at the end of every day, I've got I love metrics like many people in marketing. And I do a dashboard, and I just focus on the things that have gone well that day, for the things I'm glad about, and the things that are worrying me, the things that are, may not have gone well. And when I look at it like that, I have a much more balanced picture of my day. Because as humans, we can often be very, we're programmed to look at the negative. That's why if we get, I used to see this when I used to do appraisals with people. They would get glowing scorecards, and there'll be one negative comment, and all they want to do is focus on that. And that's just the way we are. And if you really track how you're spending your time, what you've accomplished, what opportunities have come through, you get a much more balanced picture. And that's that works for me, and I share that with all of my coaching clients to get that balanced view, because otherwise the frustrations will dominate our thinking. The one negative thing that's happened, the negative news, it colors our entire day, and it sets a tone for the day. So and that will then just have a ripple effect all the way through. But I've had enough, like this year, setting up a business in this context, and trying to get new customers, trying to do things, like a massive learning curve. I've had to learn and really push myself. I just delivered for a big client today, actually. I had to do 9 training videos, and I am a very shy kind of person, and doing videos has never been my point of comfort, but I just had to get on with it. I just had to learn and get better at it. And I think you almost have to operate at the edge, and realize that when you start something, you're going to be pretty, not that great at it, but if you keep doing it, you get better. And I think that's really been my big lesson, is that if you want to do something, don't worry so much about the timeline, but just keep moving forward. So I always wanted to live in Australia. I thought it wasn't going to happen, and then it did happen 5 years after I thought it would happen. So timeline in many ways is irrelevant. I think the key thing is to have a vision for your life and what you want to do and accomplish, if you like, and just keep moving forward, even though the journey and the path will change, and that's fine. If you don't give up on the dream, then you'll achieve it in the end, and that's my belief. And the tools I use help to keep that balanced perspective. And I would say, if we are feeling really like there's no point, then we just have to work through it. Someone once said to me that the days that you feel like, particularly now, I'm like selling, I'm calling a lot of people and doing those things. And as CMO, if I contacted people, everyone would get back to me. And that's kind of how I operated for years. Whereas when you're on the other side, a lot of people may not return your call, because it's just a sales call or whatever they'll think. So you have to overcome that, and you have to break through, so that you can achieve the results that you're searching for. And I do believe that on the other side of adversity is growth, and going through adversity, going through challenging times, we learn a lot through that experience. And that's certainly, when I look back at my life and some of the experiences I've had, it has come from those more negative moments where I have felt a sense of wondering whether I'm going down the right path, or whether I should do something completely different. That's when suddenly the solution comes through. I'd read a book or something like that, which would really just give me a nugget of insight that suddenly unlocks the door.
Lawrence, one of the questions, as you know, the title of this podcast is around what we've learned, and what I was going to hope to wrap with is kind of advice from you, but you've just given so much there in that last statement that you've almost made my question redundant, except for to say there's so much for people to take away from that in many aspects of their own personal, professional lives. But I just wonder whether, given the journey you've been on, if there are people listening in that say, well, look, this well-being stuff, mindfulness, whatever this area is, I don't really understand it. What would your advice be to anyone that says, actually, I probably need some help, I want to look at this? What are the practical first steps for anybody that wants to go away, and either for themselves, as you say, you work with clients in that space, or maybe they've listened in and thought, this could be useful for the collective, for my team or colleagues. Where does one start to go on this journey? What would you say to them?
The starting point is, because there's a lot of information, there's a lot of research that you can do to really understand that. The starting point is understanding your starting point. So, I can help. I'm a wellbeing coach, clearly. So my website provides a lot of resources, free resources that can really help to educate and inspire, to really understand the starting point. I've got a tool that helps you pinpoint where my starting point is. I've got five pillars, as I said before, and the tool helps you understand where are you out of balance at this point in time, so you can then put resources into that area, and that's applicable as an individual or as a team, as a collective, so that you can then say, what can we do? Because underpinning my entire philosophy is that we are all individuals, so there isn't one well-being and resilience toolkit that supports everybody, but there are common principles that are applicable to everyone. So movement is an important part of our well-being, but we don't all have to do the same movement. There's such a big range of things that we can do and different tools. So it's understand where you are right now, understand where you're out of balance, and then start to build a personalized resilience and well-being toolkit for you and your team, so that ultimately you can leverage that toolkit and find equilibrium when you inevitably get out of balance, because that's what happens every day. There's going to be big things and little things that are going to push us out of balance. And with the right toolkit, we can find our balance, find our equilibrium again and again in a more, in a way which utilizes less energy. So, look me up on my website, send me an email, and I'll be able to guide you and point you in the right direction, because there's so much that is out of control in our world, but the one thing we can control is our mental and our physical well-being, what we put in our body, what we put into our mind, and that will really transform our experience of life, and it will also transform the results that we get. So yeah.
I can see lots of conversation, comments, and questions in our LinkedIn link to this podcast. So I think we'll be getting some interactions from this one, Lawrence. So that was a great final tip. And just tell us your website again.
Yeah, so my website is getrawenergy.co. So get, G-E-T, raw, R-A-W, so rawenergy.co. Raw stands for resilience, authenticity, well-being.
Whenever I chat to Lawrence, whenever I listen to Lawrence, I always learn so much. And I think one of the things that he's always done, he's invested in himself and his learning as he's gone through his career. And I really admire Lawrence massively for that, as well as teaching me a lot about resilience. So I'm sure lots of people listening to that will find these threads really interesting. And to that point, actually, Steve, where's the best people for joining the conversation? Where can they join the conversation? Because we're by trade response marketers. We like a dialogue. We're not broadcasters by background. So where can people jump in?
We are not broadcasters by background, Shane. We do demonstrate that ably every week. Yes, so if you've found something of interest from what Lawrence has had to say, like Shane and I have, and Shane, as you said, I really admire Lawrence for that always be learning type attitude, as well as that self-realization. So areas that are probably quite obvious to us in retrospect, but that, ability to control oneself and look after the areas you can, and also to consider, particularly in this environment, the year that we've had, what it means for your communication, for your relationships with others is so vital. So if it sparked an interest, you've got a story to share or just a comment for Lawrence or ourselves. So as ever, you can go to wwlpodcast.co.uk. That's the home that will redirect through to our LinkedIn page where you can share comments. You can also pick up previous episodes from both Series 1 and Series 2 if you'd like to have a listen back. You're very welcome to do that. Perhaps something you've heard today has made you feel, well, actually, I've got a story to tell on this, or I know somebody that's been through a journey or would be really beneficial to share what they're going through and doing or learn, good or bad. Then Shane and I would love to hear from you, whether that's to come and be a future guest or just to share thoughts with us. And Lawrence, I'm sure that's the right place to start, Shane.
Great.
So we hopefully will see you there. As a reminder, wwlpodcast.co.uk. If you make it there, great. If you don't, then I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and we certainly look forward to tuning in with you for a future episode coming in the next few days. Thanks, everyone.